was the co-founder of the infamous street gang called the Crips. If you wanted to know how to destroy the fabric of society, then Stan could give you tips. Black and disenfranchised, he went to war with the world around him. Eventually his anger and his rage became the very things that bound him. He built his body up to gigantic proportions, but he did not build his mind. He had been frozen intellectually by those who continued to be unkind. His rage blinded him to the truth that he'd gone to war with his own people, and the excuses he made for not changing himself were often pretty feeble. He fell into the regular habit of just taking what he wanted, and he beat the hell out of the other guy if ever he was taunted. He made himself larger than life. Everyone knew who Tookie was. His exploits were often legendary. Everyone he wanted to be Tookie's cuz. And he thrived on his negative reputation. He could instill fear into the hearts of men. He was built as hard as a brick wall, and he probably had the strength of 10. But the guy at the top always has his enemies. Someone will always want to knock him down. Eventually the gangs traded fists for guns, and gunfire became the common sound. So a drive-by caught Tookie unprepared, and he got shot up really bad. The bullets hit both his feet and legs, threatening any chance of walking that he had. But he was not a man to just lie down, and he fought his way back to his feet. And despite the doctor's opinions, he would walk because he would not accept his defeat. But the experience left him rattled, and his recreational drug use became a pattern. The drugs became a part of who he was, like the rings around the planet Saturn. Sherm was one of the most common gang drugs, a mixture of marijuana and PCP, and increased the level of aggression in a person and how violent they could be. The drug also numbed any feelings of pain, so even when you were injured you could fight back. But it also numbs out all of your emotions, leaving an important part of humanity that you lack. Constant drug use makes you the kind of careless. It's hard to keep your eye firmly on the ball, and Tookie was too distracted to see what was coming, that he would face his final fall. The police arrested and accused him of killing 4 people, an act Tookie claimed he did not commit. But it didn't matter how much he protested, because it was to the legal system he'd have to submit. And the final verdict was predictable. He was found guilty and sentenced to die. And given the life he'd lived, there was absolutely no one who was asking why. Prison is a hard place to be because you're locked up with yourself 24 hours a day. And the 6 years he spent in solitary confinement couldn't keep the thoughts in his mind away. And solitary is a place where you have to face yourself. Either that or you go crazy. And Tookie was never a man to do nothing. He was not a guy that you could call lazy. So he began a regimen of exercise for his body and learning new words for his mind. And somewhere in this process there was a hell of a lot more that he would find. Expanding his mind and expanding his language offered him a different view. It altered his way of seeing things and everything that he knew. And somewhere in this awakening, a transformation began to take place. Tookie saw all that was wrong with his life because it was staring him in the face. All the men on death row from different gangs were actually all the same. All were black men disenfranchised from the world who had played a self-destructive game. Gang life had pitted them against each other, but all of them would meet the same end. Either dead or in prison, the story's the same. They would only lose in the end. And for the first time in his life he finally got it, that gang life had left him forsaken. That although he thought it had given him something, it was everything that it had taken. And that he'd been the co-founder of this thing that only ended in the black man's defeat. And it hurt him to come to the realization he'd been the master of his own deceit. And this was the last page that finally turned, and a new story would be written. Tookie would change the life that he lived from the cell in which he was sitting. So he renounced his gang affiliation and began to try to change others' children's direction. And he didn't care how other gang members would view him. He wasn't afraid of anyone's rejection. And a life transformation was all you could call it. He turned 360 degrees. He began to look for a spiritual connection, and he wasn't afraid to bend his knees. And he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, the first person on death row. But in a world that demands an eye for an eye, it wouldn't stop him from where he'd go. The world he lived in would take his life, although they never gave him one. They wouldn't acknowledge all his changes or all that he had done. So one more dead man walked the final death to his murder. It didn't matter that he wasn't the same man, because our justice system goes no further. It didn't matter that he righted his wrongs, because you get no second chance. And how many black men would take that walk due to the unfairness of circumstance? But Tookie left a legacy when he worked to tear down what he had built up. And how many children would read his words and find the empty spot in them had been filled up?